So, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this second lecture on web APIs. And today we will talk about some of the basic design rules for APIs, more particularly for URIs or resource URIs in this lecture. The content from this lecture and also the content from the next lecture, that is on Friday, should be used in your project or in your API, basically. So let's see what we are going to discuss today. So for this lecture, I will mostly rely on the second book, that is REST API Design Rulebook. And I think I already put the chapters on the website, on the course page, that you need to follow or read. And I think it's chapter 2 and 3 that some parts I will cover in this lecture. But if you want to learn more or read more about API design, you can read through chapter 2 and 3 from this second book by Mark Masse. And the slides are also on the course page. So I think the materials are already updated. Before I start with the content, I just want to remind you about the planning. So we are in course week 3 now, that is calendar week 5. And this week we will be doing or done with the lectures. Basically, you will start, or probably you have already started working on your project. So from next week, or probably until next 3 weeks, you will be working with your project and you will deliver your project on week 8. I think it's Friday of that week. But then you need to also remember that the second part, that is the essay part of this course, will also start from next week. So try to organize yourself and plan yourself, and so that you can distribute your hours between these two part of the course. Just giving you an head up, so that you are aware of that. You need to be careful about your planning and find your time to focus on the both part of the course. So we had these 3 segments or modules in this part of the course. We already covered the basics on APIs and HTTP and resource and representations in our first part. Today we will talk about more of the design part of URIs and interaction design, the way that we should interact from the client or from the server with the APIs. So we will focus basically some linguistic design aspect and some semantic communication between client and server. And I think this lecture will not be that long, so I will probably end up having the full lecture in one slot. So we will not have any break and probably will finish it earlier than I planned. So the first part, identifier design with URIs. we are already familiar with REST APIs. We are familiar with URIs, and we know that URIs are used to identify resources or to address resources or to locate resources if we are giving it uh, a protocol and it becomes an URL. But these are the two examples of URIs or more common ways to use URIs or to design URIs. So one is the opaque Uri. So as you can see, the resources or the resource here is an encoded string. And then there is another way of designing URIs, that is you can organize your resources in an hierarchical manner. So that's called hierarchical Uri or hierarchy Uri. So the the difference between these two URIs is that the first one you cannot parse objectively, and you do not know what resources you are talking about, so they are more hidden from the users. But in the second case, um, basically you can parse the URI and get information about the resources. And RFC 3986 standard and define the URI format in this way. So you have a scheme. This scheme can be HTTP or HTTPS or FTP or anything else. Then you have the authority. So basically the entry point of your API, or um, basically this is the service provider also. And then you have the path. So these paths are basically your resources or hierarchical representations of your resources. And then you have the query and the fragment. So these are also used to, let's say, filter your resources or further refine your resources the way you want. So here is an example. We have, let's say, a URI, not so it's a complete URL basically, where you are making a Google search using some strings or search um, item. Then in this URI or URL, basically you have this scheme, you have this authority, that is google.com, you have this path, that's a controller function, and then you have the query part of your URI. So I'm following the YouTube, but probably I'm not following the uh, Slack. I should maybe also follow Slack. So if you have any questions, let me know on Slack, and I will probably follow the Slack on my other screen so that I don't miss any questions from you. So you can ask your questions on either on YouTube or on Slack like before, and I will follow both from my other screen. So now we should know various rules that we need to apply in designing this kind of URIs, basically through which we access our resources or we talk to the server. So one of the very first rule, so rule number one, uh, as you will see also in your assignment, I will discuss many more rules, but in your assignment, you have only subsets of rules that I mentioned. Um, if I remember correctly, the requirement is that you need to implement at least 5 rules from them. but you can implement many more. But I will come back to assignment, I think, in the next lecture, and I will discuss more about the requirements of the assignment. Although we already discussed with Yuan, but I will go through them thoroughly. So the first rule of designing your URIs is that you should separate, or you should organize your resources in an hierarchical manner, and for that one you should use forward slash. So that's the basic rule. We use it every day, probably even without knowing the rule, but that's the rule says that forward slash separator must be used to indicate a hierarchical relationship between resources. So that's one of the very basic rule, a design rule for URIs. Then I have two examples here. One is a URI with a forward slash at the end, and another one is the same URI without any forward slash. So let me know in the chat which URI you would use if you want to find, for example, this or retrieve this shapes resource. So just write 1 for the first URI and 2 for the second one. Yes, I think there is some inputs, and all of them make sense. Yes, you are right, because we should not use a trailing slash at the end. First of all, because it does not add any semantic value, it does not make any sense, and it might confuse the users or clients. But secondly, usually, according to the first rule, I mentioned that we should use forward slash to represent a hierarchical relationship of resources, right? So if we are using the first URI, it will probably mean that there might be other resources coming up, or there might be a resource missing in the URI design. But that was not the case. So it's kind of false representation of the shapes resource. So the second rule says that a trailing forward slash should not be used in the URIs. So this is a bad design practice if you are designing your URIs or APIs. And I see, yes, all of you all agree with me. So all of you said the second URI should be preferred than the first one. So that's the second basic design rule for URIs. As I said, there are many more design rules in the book. I did not introduce or include all of them in my slides. It's up to you if you want to explore more and want to learn more from the books that I put in my Moodle. Third rule. This is also an useful rule for many of you, I guess. We might often have, or we might often want our resource names to be self-explanatory, but while making them self-explanatory, we might have a long name. And I see many examples, real examples from even famous API providers like Facebook or YouTube or whatnot. or Twitter, they use long resource names without any uh, distinct, like without any breaks or without any distinction between different concepts or different terms. And this kind of long resource names uh, are not easy to read, not easy to understand for the clients or for the end users, and they are often prone to design error or implementation error. So the good practice is that if you have a long name and if you want to represent them well, use a dash in between your concepts or in between your naming scheme. So if you, let's say, have a long resource name with 3-4 words or even 2 words, it's good to use a dash in between. So as you can clearly see, this is my first post. Is a long is a resource, is a long resource. But if I use this name without any dash, this will not be readable at all. So the good practice is to use a dash in between my words. And that's basically the third rules, that hyphens should be used to improve the readability of your URIs. And then that's another basic rule uh, that you can use to improve your URI design or to improve your resource identification. Let's go back to another rule. I think that will be also confusing, even for you who work with APIs. So my question is, do you see any special characters in this URI? And if you see any characters, what's that? Okay, I think there are some smart people here who might not see but make a smart guess. Yes, Elena is correct. So that's another very poor practice of designing URIs or designing your identifiers. So there is a underscore in this URI. So in between Mark Masse and in between this is my first post. But as a reader or as a user, I don't see them uh, with my naked eye, because many text editors or some browsers or programming tools, they tend to underline your URL or any links. Thus, it's not possible or not easy to see those special characters like underscores. So yes, there is this underscore which you might choose to design your URI to separate them or separate the words or separate the concepts or entities. But this is also not a good design practice to use underscore to separate them. Rather, you should use dash that are even visible if your URIs are underlined or if they have a hyperlink, uh, or if you have a link to click even on the browser. So that's the fourth rule, that says underscores should not be used in URIs. I guess if I were not telling this, you would um, still design your API or URIs using underscores, but probably now you will not use this underscore anymore. And even after that, if you use in your APIs, and if I see that there are some URIs that you designed using underscore, that could be a bad news. So this is a poor design practice, basically. Try to avoid, or you should not use underscores at all in your resource. And also because there is different representations based depending on the platform you are using. If you are sending request to your to the server from your browser, not browser, so for your command line, or from your terminal and so on. So depending on the platform, Windows, Mac, Linux, and others, they might have different representations of this underscore. So they are kind of basically not very useful to use in your URI. So I don't know who is this gentleman. I see it quite often that put comments in foreign languages. I don't know. So there is a question from Daniel. Should we implement checks for these rules, or just not add possible routes using these URI formats? Yeah, I mean, you should not implement checks for these rules, but you should follow these rules when you are designing your URIs in the first place. I mean, for example, for my previous research, I used some of those rules to check the quality of APIs that are available in practice. So that I had a goal, let's say, to survey the real APIs or real URIs, and I found, yes, there are some providers, API providers, that use underscores in their URI design, and this might use the not use it, this might impact the understandability or the usability of these URIs. But no, you should not implement any checks for your project. You only make sure that you follow those rules. That's it. So another design rule. So if you, as you see, there are 3 URIs. This can be also an interesting exercise for you. So which URIs you think are similar out of those 3? Or which URIs represent the same resource out of those 3? Do you have any guess? I think people who are already working with APIs or developing APIs, they should have a quick answer for this. First and second, someone said. Elena said all. Okay. David said all the same. Maria and Rebecca said first and second. I agree with those answers. Yes, the scheme part and the entry point, or the API owner part, they don't matter if they are in uppercase or lowercase, because whenever you are sending a request using browser or any other client, they are automatically converted by default to lowercase. So in this case, basically the first one and the second one are the same. That means from http until .org, even though they are in opposite case, it's not a problem. But then also between first one and second one, or between second one and between first one and the third one, and between the second one and the third one, as you can see, the scheme and the API owner or entry point, they are same because they are also in small, but the resources, they are in different uh, formats though, so they are in uppercase, and that's the difference here. So with a uppercase name, it is, or it should basically referring to a different resource than the resource in the lowercase name. And you should be careful of this one also, because the standard RFC 3986 defines that URIs should be case sensitive. So an resource identifier with a small letter on and a resource identifier with a capital letter are not the same. But in general, uh, we should consider to design all our URIs using lowercase letters to avoid any kind of confusions for the clients or for the users. So my folder, so there was a question from Elena. My folder with capital M and my folder with small m, are the two different resources? Yes. They represent two different resources according to this standard that I mentioned, 3986 RFC. So to avoid confusion, it's good to use always small or lowercase letters for your URIs. So that was the rule number 5. Then rule number 6, and I think that is also a very common design practice that we often apply, but we shouldn't. And that is, let me ask you then, instead of telling you the fact. So again, between URI 1 and between URI 2, which one you would pick and why? Or why not? What do you think? I think I already have hints on the bottom, but probably, yes, I think Elena is right, and probably all of you are right, because all of you are saying number 2. But unfortunately, although we are aware as developers about this fact, we tend to not to follow this rule. And the rule is that you should not use extension or file extension for your resources. And that is also due to a security reason, because um, people who are not your intended client, they might get this URI and they might predict the content type of this URI or body type of this URI, just looking at the URI design. So from the first part, or for the first URI, I already know that it's a JSON resource, or it's a JSON representation of a resource. And that's not a good design choice from the security perspective. And from the second URI, we have no hints or no clue about the representation of our resource. Rather, we should use or make good use of the HTTP headers that we already discussed in our first lecture. That is, when you are sending request as a client, you should use accept headers, and when you are sending response as a server, you should use content type header to say that, okay, the resource representations is a JSON format. So that's the rule number 6, that file extensions should not be included in URIs. So I already mentioned several reasons why you should not include file extensions in the URIs, and it's also a poor design practice if you do so. So there was a question: Are any of the rules checked using ESLint? I am not sure though, because these are static URI design rules. But I personally also did not use ESLint. But there might be a very little or very few of them, if done at all. Even the book that was written on this design rules of APIs, I think that guy is also a research background guy, so he might not have like very practical engagement with API providers or practitioners. But if this ESLint is not associated with many of these rules, probably that can be also a new development to integrate these rules, but that's another topic, I think. But yes, I personally don't, or I'm not aware of if some of the rules are part of ESLint to check. So there are 2 more rules about designing the authority, or designing the not designing the URIs, but not concerning the resources. These are more concerning the entry points or API providers. So one is the authority design. So if you are providing an API, and as a service owner, when you are providing URIs for various resources or various services, the rule is that you should use a consistent subdomain name for your API. So if you are, let's say, it doesn't matter if you have 10 resources or if you have 1,000 resources, you should always use this consistent subdomain name. So it can be api.soccer.restapi.org. It can be api1. So if you have new version, it can be api1.soccer.restapi.org. But for all your resources, you should use a consistent subdomain name. So you should not use different subdomain names for different groups of resources. That's what I'm saying. So that's a simple rule and probably easy to follow. But then there is another rule for a similar part of the URI, that is, you should also have a consistent subdomain for your client or development portal. So in this case, you should always use developer.soccer.restapi.org. Not that sometimes you use developer and sometimes you use dev and sometimes you use different subdomain names. So this is about basically naming of the domains or subdomains. And as you know, many or most of the APIs provide this development portal for, let's say, giving you access key, or they have a discussion forum, or you can register your applications and so on. But the rule is that your authority part of the URI should have consistent subdomains, both for the API and for the developer or clients. So that was rule number 8. And then let me talk about a little bit on resource part or resources. So we know that each REST API usually have a resource model, right? So resource model is nothing but a hierarchical representations of your resources. Uh, Different resources might be connected or related or dependent on each other, and that's basically gives you a resource model if you have a overall picture of your resources in your system or in your API. So this is an example of a resource modeling. Like you have a leagues or a number of leagues. Each leagues has different, let's say, cities or states. And then each of the states have different teams, and then those teams might have team members and so on. So this trebuchet is one of the teams. And if you see from the uh, right to left, you see that you have more specific requirements to more general, resources to more general resources or higher level resources. And if you go from left to right, you see that you have more specific resources. And those resources are not only organized in a hierarchical manner, those resources also identifies the key concepts of your APIs or of your uh, application. And the key concepts, of course, are the leagues or the teams or the team members and so on. So this is commonly known as a model of a resource. And this concept is similar to object-oriented or relational and database modeling, where you also have concepts or data items, and you have a hierarchy of data items or a relation with the data items. So resource modeling basically comes from this object-oriented or relational uh, modeling, database modeling. So why I'm talking about resource modeling, because there are 4 different types of uh, resources, or there are basically, these are known as archetypes. And whenever you are making a request or getting a response, you are basically making or sending your URIs with one of these four archetypes. So those are basically document, collection, store, and controller. Probably you are already familiar with them and using in your everyday life as a developer, but I will quickly go through them. And I think I have some rules also related to these archetypes in URI design. So the first one is the document. That's the very common and most popular, I would say, resource archetypes. It's a singular concept, so it can be anything from a single data item to a large document, and can be represented in any form. So in this case, Seattle is a resource uh, that is a document archetype. So if you make a request with this URI, you might end up getting uh, information about Seattle. And then same as trebuchet. So if you make a call with this URI, you might get information about this trebuchet team. And then if you make another call with this URI, the last one, you might get information about Mike. So then it depends what type of representation you want. But all these are examples of document type, or the archetype called document, where you are only sending or receiving a document as part of your request or response. But then there is another archetype that is also common, but not so common as a document, that is called collection. Also, as part of your daily life or as a developer, you are using collection in your resource URI design, which is, so collection is basically a server managed directory of resource, or collection of resources. As a client, I might want to add or delete items or resources from a collection, but then it's up to the collection or the server uh, that will either let me or deny me to change or delete the collection items, because the server is the owner of this collection and it's managed by server also. So these are the examples. Like we have a teams collection, so we have multiple teams under with this in this collection. Then we also have players collection. So this team trebuchet have multiple players, and then each player might have their own IDs or some own identifications. In the same way, we have a number of teams in this teams collection, and then each team might have their own ID. So in this case, for example, trebuchet is one of the team in the teams collection. And then there is another not so common research archetypes, that is store. So store is basically the opposite concept of collection. Collection is a server managed resource set or resource repository, whereas store is basically a client managed or client side resource repository. User cannot create new resources under this collection. It can only update or delete or get resources from it, because since this is a client side or client managed resource, it cannot create by itself new URIs or new resources or resource identifiers. It can work only on the resources that are sent from the server, and then client basically put or store or manage it from the or in the client side, so we cannot create new resources. An API, about API rules, someone should do a link or spell check on API URIs. Yes. Did I have any errors, or maybe that rules by Elena was from my slides? I'm not sure. Did you see any errors? But yes, there might be some typing errors. So the last research archetypes is about a controller. So we also often use controller as a developer, quite often, but probably without knowing it, because as you know, from the browser, if we are using browser as a client, we are making many post requests and get requests, and most of those post requests are basically making using controller. So the applications or actions within our applications, those are basically done using this controller. And there are also some rules that you should follow whenever you are designing or writing your controller. Uh, I think I have them in the next few slides. So this is one example of a controller. So we are sending a post request. Um, so we are basically creating a new alert by sending this post request. And usually a controller has some input and some output. It's like a function or method uh, in object-oriented programming. So you are not only sending a message body uh, in your request, in your after your post request, you will also basically send a message body. You will receive a message body as an output of the request. So coming back to the rules, rule number 9, that is, a singular noun should be used for document names. Whenever you are thinking your resource as a document, you should always use a noun, plus it should be a singular noun. So players here in this case, this can be thought of a document, but it would be rather a violation of REST URI design principles or rules that was identified basically in which standard. Let me remind myself. That was RFC 3986 in this standard. So whenever you are designing your URIs and adding a document as part of your URI, that document should be always singular, and that should be always a noun. We find examples where people violate this rule, but that's also not a good practice. What should be plural is that your collection. And so this is also the opposite is also true. So you should not use a singular noun for your collection. You should always use plural nouns to identify your collections. And that's also, I think, common sense from the grammatical point of view, right? Because this is a collection, it should be plural anyways, and also it should be a noun. So these two rules are also common rules in URI designs that you may violate or miss somehow. So you should be careful when you are designing your URIs also for this assignment, that you properly name in your documents and collections and distinguish them between singular and plural nouns using. So then the stores in similar to collection, the store names should be also plural noun, and the only difference, as I said, it's a client managed repository, but the collection is a server managed repository. That was rule 11, and the rule 12 is about controller. So your controller names should be always a verb or verb phrase, because it's a method or function that is doing something. And we use controllers only when our HTTP methods does not allow them uh, or allow directly to make such request. For example, the basic methods, the CRUD methods, uh, you can use get, for example, uh, to read a resource or to get a resource, but then you do not have a HTTP method for registering an user or uh, filtering your emails or your list, or reindexing your database, or running a test suite over the browser, right? So for this kind of actions or functions, we use controller, and we, as I mentioned, we use usually the post method. But then when you are writing your controller, or you are naming your controller, you should not use a noun, rather than you should use a verb or verb phrase to be more specific. For example, in this case, run test suite, it's more meaningful than if we would write only run or only run test. So try to be more explicit when you are naming your controllers. So that was rule number 12. Then rule number 13 is about, basically also part of this RFC 6570 standard, that is related to URI template. And it says that you should be able to uh, substitute your variables in your URI design with concrete value when you are making your request. So basically what it says, that your URI should be a variable URI rather than a concrete or a static URI, and it gives you more flexibility. Uh, so you should use URI template when you are designing your URIs. So these are the two examples. One where there is specific values are substitute when you are making the calls. But then the second example is that you are passing UUID when you are making this call. So one is the example of Opaque Uri, and another one is a hierarchical Uri. So these are two different examples. So the rule here is that you should try, or you should use variable URI design rather than a concrete URI. I think that's also an interesting. So this rule. Okay, so out of these four examples, which example you think is not appropriate? Or improper, or we should not do it when we are making a request or when we are designing an API. So what do you think? I didn't have numbers, but we have 2 GET requests and 1 delete and 1 post. So someone said 1, 2, someone said 1, 2, 3. Someone said only the get methods. So finally I got one answer correct. That is by Denny Werneson. Yes, all of them are basically incorrect or not appropriate from the Uri design perspective. So basically, we know based on the semantics that we discussed in the previous lecture that a method should do only what is intended to do. So that's one problem. So out of this for URI, because as you can see, we are deleting an user using get method. We are deleting an user also in this example using a get method, and then we are also deleting a user using post method. Although the third example is correct in that sense, but third example also had another problem, and the problem is, so this delete method, we are already making it as part of our URI design. Then we also have other delete methods in other URI, other examples, but the idea here is that as part of your URI design, you should not use HTTP methods or the name of the HTTP methods. Not delete, not get, not post, not put. So in this first example, as you can see, we have a resource or controller basically here that says delete user. So in the controller name, you have this delete that should not be used. But again, you are basically using a wrong method here. So if you want to delete something, you should use delete method. But then even if you are using this delete method, you should not use in your resource name or in your controller name this delete method again, because you are duplicating basically. So all of them are incorrect in some ways, and that's the good example. Delete and then / users and then specific user ID. Yes, Elena, you got it right. So that's the rule 14 that says CRUD function names should not be used in the URI design. It's not only about CRUD functions, it's basically any other HTTP functions that are available, both standard and non-standard. Those function names should not be in your URI design. So be careful also about this. This is also a common mistake by API designers or developers. And in particular, for example, 1, 2, and 4, they are even more confusing for the clients because you are using get method or post method, but you are trying to delete a resource, so which is not a good design or good practice. Okay, so now I will talk briefly about query design. So we were talking about earlier the design of the authority. So as you remember, if you remember subdomain and domains, we also talked about path. So when you should use singular or plural resource names, when how you should define controller names and so on. But now we will talk about the last part of the URI, that is the query part, and that's the query design. And query part are basically after this question mark, so whatever you have. So rule number 15 says these are also basic rules for URI. So it says that the query component of an URI should be used to filter collections or stores. So instead of writing, let's say, this way, users, then /1234, the better way of writing that URI will be users and then question mark, then ID equals to 1234. So try to filter your collections or stores rather than fixing them by one value, concrete value, or using your collections or stores altogether. So that's rule number 15. And then rule number 16, it's also similar. So before you were filtering your collection or resource or stores, now you are getting a subset of your resources or collections or stores. So basically what you are doing, you are showing to the users or to your clients your resources from the collection or stores using some pagination. So basically you might have several pages of in your response, and that you can traverse or browse through. And basically what it says, that instead of showing a large resource in one full page, you can break down your resource representation and do a pagination to show your collection or to show your store resources. And that's also a good practice in URI design to make it more flexible and also useful in that way. Okay, so we were talking about URI design, and I think this part is fairly small, so I will probably continue and finish early rather than have a break, because we already also spent more than an hour. So now we will talk about interaction design, and that is basically about status code that we already discussed also in the first lecture, because we also mentioned that those HTTP status codes they also convey, or they also are helpful for semantic communication between client and server. So client appropriately knows what the server mean by something based on the codes, and it's the same also for the server. And REST APIs basically will include HTTP 1.1, including all its standard and non-standard methods, all its response code or status code, and all its HTTP headers. That's why there is a very good alignment with REST APIs and with HTTP, and that's the reason Roy Fielding also proposed to use HTTP as a baseline of RESTful APIs, or as a baseline for REST APIs. And we already know that there are 8 standard HTTP methods, but there are also I think 3 or 4 non-standard HTTP methods. We can use all of them in our APIs, and those 3 non-standard HTTP methods are more useful basically for I don't remember these 3 or 4, but they are more useful basically for RESTful APIs, and we should leverage all these methods. We already know what they do, but I will not go into the detail of these individual methods here. But rule 17, that's another problem that we found common, but not a severe problem. That says that you should not use get or post to basically do everything or to tunnel other HTTP methods. So what it says that if you want to delete something, you should use delete method instead of using post and then use a delete controller. It's the same for get method. So if you want to update a method, you definitely should not use the get method, rather than you should use put method. So the idea here is that if you use or misuse basically of these HTTP methods, that that may confuse client or misinterpret the intent of your resource to the client. So also for your API, try not to for your assignment, try not to use only get and post method and forget about other methods. I know it's a very common practice. For example, if you are using a browser as a client, you are mostly using get and post method, but in fact that's a limitation also, but you should not do this. In other words, this then rule 18, that's also a basic rule that get method should be only used to retrieve a representation of a resource and should not do anything else. And then it should also not have any body in your get request. So the body should be only in put or post request, not for get or delete request. So that's another basic rule for interaction design. Then the head should be also used to retrieve header information. It should not be used to read the body, or it should not have any body at all when making the request. So be careful to use the HTTP methods for what they are intended to do, and if they should have a body or not. So don't override or overuse a HTTP method in your API. And then the put method, so it should be used only to mutable resources, and if you try it on immutable resources, you will be denied anyways. But it may include body or not, depending on your need. The post method, it should be always used to create a resource, not other uses should be encouraged. And although, as I said, most of the browsers they use post method, or they override post method for other functionalities. But that, I think, that's something you cannot ignore. But for this get, put, and post method, basically try to maintain their semantics as much as possible in your APIs, not to confuse clients. Then I think I already discussed this before. So the post method should be used for controllers. So for controllers, you should never use put, get, or delete methods. That's I think a natural choice that you should use post. And as we also discussed, that post method is unsafe and non-idempotent. And talking about this safeness and idempotency of the methods, I think we also discussed in our previous lecture which methods are safe and which methods are idempotent. And we also mentioned that all the safe methods are by default idempotent, but not all the unsafe methods are by default not idempotent. So some of the unsafe methods are also idempotent, meaning that put and delete, they will result in always the same if you call them multiple times. Um, so it will be the same value every time you give the same value to update. So then the rule number 23 is the delete. So we talked about get, put, and post, but again, similarly, we should use the delete method only to remove a resource, so not to do any other stuff using the delete method. So we should not use also post method to delete a resource and so on. Then when it comes to interaction, the status code are the core in the interaction between client and server. So the standard define that your status line should be in this format always. That is, you should have a HTTP version, then a space, then the status code, then another space, and then the reason or the phrase. So that's a very clean example of how your status line should be in your response. So there are 5 categories of interaction or status code. One, the group one is just informational, so there is no nothing about your request or response or success or failure. Then the group two is about success. So any kinds of success request should be communicated with this group two. I think there is some confusions also from our previous lectures that we discussed, but all kinds of success communication, successful communication should be handled by group two. And then group three is about redirection. So if your resources or your services have been moved from one location to another location, that should be communicated only using group three. And then group four is about client error, and group five is about server error. So never mix up between these two groups, because you cannot send a code from 500 groups that is a client error and vice versa to be semantically correct, or to have a semantically correct communication. So rule 24 is basically about this success group or successful request. So you should use appropriate code based on what type of success it is, and not mix up different success types. And I will not go through each of them. You can look at them later and make sure that you do not use inappropriate status code in your response. Then rule 25 is also about 300 groups. There are many other codes. I did not include all of them either. And you also have to make sure that you are using the proper code or status code. Same for rule 26, that is the client error. If the client is sending malformed request or unauthorized request, or sending a method that is not acceptable and so on, you should properly identify those status code, or properly identify the error types and send it to the client. Same for the server error. So you should also use the proper code or status code if there is problem on the server side. And you should not mix up server error and client error when use these codes interchangeably. So regarding the status codes, Mats and Yuan has said that sometimes we should lie to the client or be vague and not specify the problem with this due to security reasons. Your thoughts on this? I am not probably aware of what are those security reasons, but this book basically is suggesting to use appropriate codes, uh, uh, not to lie to the clients on the other hand. So I don't know if there is any resources on this, or probably I can discuss with Yuan to learn more about this security threats. But in general, the good practice is that uh, you should not lie to your clients. And also because your clients are authenticated clients, those are not like what do you say, third party clients, right? But that's a good uh, point, I think, uh, raised by Elena. Okay, so basically we are at the end of our lecture. So we basically looked at 4 groups of rules. So the first group was about Uri design. So that is about the general design of an Uri, including the service owner part, scheme part, not a scheme, subdomain part, and also the resources part. Then we also talked about rules for resources, when they should be singular or plural, when they should be nouns and verbs and so on. We also looked at proper use of HTTP methods for their intention or for the proper semantics. So for what each method is defined or should be used, they should be used for that purpose only, not for other purposes. And also we talked about some rules bit for communication. So various status code, and that your communication should be meaningful and correct, based on which Elena has this point that we might need to sometime lie to the client, but I might not agree completely on this, since those clients are, I mean, if your clients are authenticated and if they are authorized to send you request, why should I lie to them and misguide them? That is my concern, but other people might have other views. But yeah, I will talk to Yuan to learn maybe more about these security issues. And that's for now. Do you have any question before we close this session? I think, and the next lecture will be on Friday, uh, same time, and that will be the last lecture, I suppose. So, any questions so far, or any other points that you want to raise? Is there any lecture that was planned this afternoon? I'm not sure. There was no planned activity this afternoon, right? There is only, I think, tutoring tomorrow afternoon, if I remember correctly. Daniel said it's not about authenticated clients, it's more about access to, let me show what it says, access to unauthorized resources. Should we give info about the existence of the resource or just a no content response? I think, I mean, this is also a common problem. Like clients are asking for unauthorized resources, but if they are not authorized, they will not get the access anyways. But I mean, they should also know that they are not authorized to this, right? Uh, and again, as a client of an API, unless I'm a hacker, uh, I should not have any uh, bad intention to try to break that authorization or try to find a way to that unauthorized resource. So I would not lie, rather give a clear message. What was the reason of this denial? Okay, so the lecture is on Friday, uh, but I think there was some confusions about the time. But if I remember correctly, it's the same time, right? Uh, Let me see the calendar. Uh, yeah, it looks like I have also in the morning. So the next lecture will be Friday in the morning. Okay, I think now I see now. So why there is a confusion? Uh, in the YouTube, it was planned on 1:15, but then mm, okay, I will talk to um Johan, but I think there was a miscommunication. So it should be in the morning, not in the afternoon. I will change the schedule for YouTube. I can see that, yeah, in the YouTube it's scheduled in the afternoon. It will be in the morning, just to uh, confirm you, uh, and so that you don't become confused. So it's 10, yes, 10:15. Okay, so have a nice rest of the day and have a nice afternoon. See you on Friday morning at 10.